The day before Thanksgiving, 1971, a man in a black tie walked into an airport with a briefcase and vanished into legend. He hijacked a Boeing 727, claimed he had a bomb, demanded $200,000 in cash, then parachuted into a stormy night sky, never to be seen again. No body, no confirmed identity, no answers. Who was D.B. Cooper, and how did he pull off the only unsolved skyjacking in U.S. history? What you're about to hear isn't just a mystery, it's a manhunt that still hasn't ended. On the rainy afternoon of November 24th, 1971, the day before Thanksgiving, a quiet man in a business suit and black tie approached the Northwest Orient Airlines counter in Portland, Oregon. He paid cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305 to Seattle and gave the name Don Cooper. Carrying a briefcase and a paper bag, he boarded the Boeing 727 along with 35 other passengers. Cooper took a seat in the rear of the cabin, ordered a bourbon and soda, and waited as the plane took off around 2:50 p.m. that Wednesday. Shortly after takeoff, Cooper discreetly handed flight attendant Florence Schaffner a note. Thinking it was just a lonely businessman's phone number, she slipped it unopened into her pocket. Cooper leaned in toward her and whispered, "Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb." Schaffner read Cooper's message, which in neat capital letters stated he had a bomb in his briefcase. To prove it, Cooper cracked open the briefcase, revealing a glimpse of wires and red cylinders inside. His demands were both bold and specific. He wanted $200,000 in cash, all in $20 bills, and 4 parachutes, 2 primary back chutes and 2 reserve chutes. He calmly instructed the attendant to relay the demands to the cockpit. For the next 30 minutes, Flight 305 circled the Seattle area as FBI agents on the ground scrambled to assemble the ransom and parachutes. At 5:39 p.m., the Boeing 727 landed at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Cooper allowed the 36 passengers to leave in exchange for the $200,000 ransom and the parachutes, which were brought aboard. Maintaining an eerie calm, Cooper kept several crew members on board: the pilot, co-pilot, flight engineer, and 1 flight attendant, and ordered the plane refueled. He outlined an audacious escape plan, instructing the pilots to fly toward Mexico City at minimum speed, around 170 miles per hour, and no higher than 10,000 feet altitude. Specifically, he specified no escort fighters and that the plane remain in a low-pressure configuration with the landing gear down and flaps at 15 degrees. Cooper knew about the 727's unique rear-aft stairway and wanted it lowered once they were airborne. Around 7:40 p.m., Flight 305 took off again, heading south with Cooper and the crew. Not long after, as the jet flew through rain clouds over the Pacific Northwest, Cooper made the crew crowd into the cockpit and stay there. Wearing a parachute, he used rope from one of the reserve chutes to secure the heavy bag of cash to himself. Then, in the dark of night, he did the incredible. He opened the rear door and parachuted into the stormy sky somewhere between Seattle and Reno, about a half an hour after takeoff. The pilots felt a sudden bump in the cabin pressure around 8:10 p.m., and when they eventually landed the plane safely in Reno, Cooper was gone. The aft stairway was still open, a confirmation that the hijacker had vanished into the night with the money. The crew was unharmed, but D.B. Cooper had escaped. Law enforcement immediately blanketed the likely drop zone, a rugged, forested area of southern Washington state near the Lewis River. They anticipated finding a parachute hung in a tree or, grimly, a body. A massive ground search started through the dense woods and muddy terrain, involving FBI agents, sheriff's deputies, volunteers, helicopters, and even the National Guard. Amazingly, they found no sign of Cooper. No parachute, no footprints, no clothing, Nothing. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole. The first 24 hours of searching yielded only frustration and confusion. Little did anyone know, this was just the beginning of one of the longest and most perplexing manhunts in American history. The FBI immediately opened an extensive investigation, codenamed NORJAC, for Northwest Hijacking, that would go on for decades. Agents interviewed passengers and crew, collected evidence from the plane, and scoured the hijacker's seat for anything he may have left behind. They created a composite sketch from witness descriptions and distributed it nationwide. In the first 5 years alone, the FBI considered around 800 possible suspects, ranging from ex-military paratroopers to petty criminals. By the 5-year anniversary of the heist, they had eliminated all but about 24 suspects from consideration. Over the next 4 decades, that list would grow to over 1,000 serious suspects investigated, yet not a single arrest. Despite the vast manhunt, D.B. Cooper's true identity and fate remained elusive. Still, investigators did catch a few intriguing breaks over the years, just not enough to solve the case. In 1978, a deer hunter deep in the woods near Castle Rock, Washington, found a placard printed with instructions for lowering a Boeing 727's aft stairs. This placard matched the type used on Flight 305, suggesting it could have come off the hijacked plane as Cooper lowered the rear stairs in mid-flight. It was a tantalizing clue that the search area was in the right general region, but it still didn't lead to Cooper. In February 1980, over 8 years after the skyjacking, an 8-year-old boy made a stunning discovery on the banks of the Columbia River. While digging in the sand along a stretch of riverbank known as Tina Bar, young Brian Ingram unearthed 3 rotting packets of U.S. $20 bills totaling $5,800. The bills were badly decomposed and disintegrating, but their serial numbers were still legible, and they matched the ransom money from the Cooper hijacking. This marked the first and only physical evidence from Cooper's loot ever found. The location was about 20 miles downstream from the suspected jump area, raising many questions. How did the money end up there? Had it floated downriver? Was it buried intentionally? Despite extensive searches of the surrounding sandbars and riverbanks after Ingram's find, no additional money or evidence turned up. The discovery did, however, lend weight to the theory that Cooper might not have survived. Perhaps his money, and maybe his body, washed into the Columbia River. The FBI allowed Brian Ingram to keep some of the recovered bills as mementos years later, and the find rekindled public fascination with the case. Back on the plane, Cooper had been careful to leave few clues. He took back the ransom note from the flight attendant so investigators couldn't analyze it. But in his haste, he did leave behind a few items: 8 cigarette butts in an ashtray, a black JCPenney clip-on tie with a mother-of-pearl tie clip that he had removed and left on his seat, and reportedly a pair of sunglasses. No usable fingerprints were found on the tie or in his seating area. Unfortunately, the cigarette butts, which could have been a goldmine for DNA evidence, were lost by the FBI at some point before modern DNA testing was available. This was a frustrating blow for investigators, since those filters likely held Cooper's saliva. The tie, however, was retained in evidence, and decades later it yielded some intriguing data. In the late 2000s, FBI technicians re-examined the clip-on tie using an electron microscope and found tiny particles on it, pure titanium, along with other rare metals. These substances were extremely unusual in 1971, and their presence hinted that Cooper might have worked in an industrial or engineering job. The tie also provided a partial DNA profile. The FBI disclosed that they obtained a DNA sample from the tie, though it was incomplete. They compared this DNA evidence against several suspects over the years. In one instance, the niece of a suspect came forward in 2011 claiming her uncle was D.B. Cooper, but the FBI stated that DNA from Cooper's tie did not match the uncle's DNA, eliminating him as the source. It's important to note that because the DNA from the tie was only a partial profile and might have come from anyone who had worn or handled the tie, it never conclusively identified the hijacker. It did help rule people out, but it never gave a definitive name to D.B. Cooper. From early on, agents debated whether Cooper had the skills to survive his daring escape. Initially, some believed Cooper might be an airborne veteran or experienced paratrooper. He had enough knowledge to specify the 727's flaps and altitude, and correctly mentioned that the McChord Air Force Base was only 20 minutes from Seattle. However, over time, the FBI came to suspect that Cooper was not an expert skydiver at all. Jumping from a jet in the middle of a stormy night over rough, wooded terrain, wearing loafers and a trench coat, was a foolhardy act that no seasoned skydiver would likely choose. In fact, one of the reserve parachutes he demanded was a dummy training chute that had its canopy sewn shut, and Cooper took it with him when he jumped, a mistake an experienced jumper would almost surely have recognized and avoided. All this suggested that Cooper may have been less prepared than he appeared. The FBI publicly stated their belief that Cooper probably did not survive the jump, citing the high risk factors: the frigid, rainy weather that night, the 200-mile-an-hour wind blast he would have encountered stepping off the stairs, the fact that he had no way to steer his parachute, and the dangerous terrain below. And tellingly, not a single dollar of the ransom, aside from the $5,800 found on Tina Bar in 1980, has ever turned up in circulation. Not in banks, not in casinos, not anywhere. The money was never spent, which might mean Cooper didn't live to spend it. The search for D.B. Cooper officially lasted 45 years. Leads continued to trickle in, but they all led nowhere concrete. Finally, in July 2016, the FBI formally closed the active investigation, citing that its resources could be better used on more pressing cases. Norjack was shelved as an unsolved case, albeit not forgotten. As the FBI's 2016 statement put it, they would no longer devote manpower to the Cooper case, but if any specific physical evidence came forward, like the parachute or the rest of the money, they would certainly investigate that. Before we get into the suspects, it's worth noting the broader impact of Cooper's caper. The skyjacking had immediate effects on aviation security. In the years after 1971, there was a flurry of copycat hijackings by criminals inspired by Cooper's apparent success. In response, airports and airlines tightened security dramatically. By 1973, the FAA required all passengers and bags to be screened. Metal detectors at airports became the new norm, and armed guards were posted at checkpoints. Airlines also modified their 727 aircraft with a device nicknamed the Cooper vane, a simple mechanical latch that prevents the rear stairway from being opened in flight. This way, no one else would be able to replicate Cooper's mid-air escape method. D.B. Cooper, in effect, forced the aviation industry to reinvent its approach to security. With the investigation stalled, the question on everyone's mind was obvious. Who was D.B. Cooper? Over the past half-century, numerous suspects have been proposed, some by the FBI, others by journalists, and many by armchair detectives. Let's explore a few of the most high-profile and intriguing candidates that have emerged in the D.B. Cooper saga. Richard McCoy Jr. This name comes up often as a top Cooper suspect. McCoy was a Vietnam veteran and Green Beret who pulled off an eerily similar airplane hijacking less than 5 months after the Cooper heist. On April 7, 1972, McCoy hijacked a United Airlines 727 flying from Denver, demanded a $500,000 ransom, and parachuted out over Utah with the money. He even used the rear stairs just like Cooper. McCoy was caught 2 days later with cash and hijackers' paraphernalia and was convicted of air piracy. Given the copycat details, many speculated that McCoy was Cooper trying a second heist. Even some FBI agents thought the crimes were so alike that they had to be the same man. McCoy, however, was in his late 20s and did not match the physical descriptions given by the flight attendants from the Northwest flight. In fact, those crew members firmly ruled him out when interviewed. McCoy also had an alibi of sorts. Reportedly, he was home with his family in Utah on Thanksgiving in 1971. The FBI ultimately ruled McCoy out as D.B. Cooper, and he was never charged in the Cooper case. But the story doesn't end there. McCoy's own family has raised new questions. In 2023, McCoy's children, Shantae and Richard III, publicly claimed they believed their late father was D.B. Cooper. They revealed that after their mother passed away, they turned over some of McCoy's belongings to the FBI, including an old parachute and harness stashed in a shed, and even a pilot's logbook that they say places McCoy in Washington State the day of the hijacking. This new evidence is being examined, and some wonder if it could finally link the two skyjackings. McCoy remains a compelling suspect to many due to the uncanny similarities, but as of now, the Cooper case officially remains unsolved. Robert Rackstraw. A colorful character with a checkered past, Rackstraw became a popular Cooper suspect in recent years. He was a former U.S. Army paratrooper and pilot who had the skills needed to be Cooper, and a life story wild enough to fit the legend. In the 1970s, Rackstraw was accused of everything from explosives possession to check fraud to the murder of his own stepfather, and even faked his own death in 1978 by pretending to crash a plane in California. While those charges might suggest an unstable con man rather than a criminal genius, a group of investigators led by filmmaker Thomas Colbert became convinced Rackstraw was D.B. Cooper. They point to cryptic letters allegedly sent by D.B. Cooper in the months after the hijacking, which they claim Rackstraw encoded with clues to his own identity and military service. In 2016, Colbert and his team published a book, The Last Master Outlaw, laying out a case that Rackstraw was the man behind the alias. Rackstraw, for his part, denied being Cooper and often toyed with reporters' questions about it. When asked point blank in one 2016 interview, he quipped, "I'm afraid of heights," deflecting the question with a laugh. The FBI looked into Rackstraw in the late 1970s, but publicly discounted him as a suspect due to lack of concrete evidence. Colbert's independent investigation decades later kept the theory alive in the media, but many experts remain unconvinced. Rackstraw's lawyer dismissed the Cooper theory as the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. In July 2019, Rackstraw died of natural causes, taking whatever secrets he had with him. Whether he was truly D.B. Cooper or just an attention-loving outlaw remains an open question in the eyes of some, but so far, no definitive link has been proven. Kenneth Christensen. Christensen is often cited as a top suspect due to a mix of circumstantial evidence and a possible confession. He was a mild-mannered former paratrooper who worked for Northwest Orient Airlines, first as a mechanic and then as a flight attendant and purser in the 1960s. Christensen lived in Washington State and even knew how to jump out of planes from his Army days. Years after the hijacking, his own brother Lyle became suspicious that Kenneth might have been Cooper. On his deathbed in 1994, Kenneth Christensen told his brother, "There is something you should know, but I cannot tell you," an eerie statement that Lyle interpreted as a possible admission. After Kenneth died, Lyle found gold coins and valuable stamps hidden in his brother's attic, and noted that Kenneth, who earned a modest airline salary, had inexplicably bought a house with cash just months after the 1971 hijacking. In the late 2000s, a journalist investigating the Cooper case dug into Christensen's life and came away thinking he was the strongest candidate. The FBI did look at Christensen but never declared him a prime suspect publicly. Agents noted that Christensen didn't match the eyewitness descriptions very well. Still, he had many of the right traits and opportunities, and no one has definitively cleared or proven him. Christensen's name remains in the mix largely due to that alleged deathbed hint in his aviation background. Duane Weber. Duane Weber was a World War II Army veteran and career criminal, a con man, document forger, and burglar who spent years in prison. On his deathbed in 1995, Weber turned to his wife and uttered a bewildering confession. "I'm Dan Cooper." At the time, his wife Jo says she didn't know the significance of that name. Only later, after a friend reminded her who Dan D.B. Cooper was, did Jo Weber connect the dots. Stunned, she dug into her late husband's possessions and memories. She recalled Duane had a knee injury he claimed he got jumping out of a plane. and he had nightmares in which he talked in his sleep about leaving fingerprints on a plane. She even remembered a 1979 trip to Seattle in the Columbia River, during which Duane took a walk alone along the riverbank not far upstream of where the money would be found a year later. Joe Weber also found an old library book about D.B. Cooper with notes scribbled in the margins in what looked like Duane's handwriting. All this sounds intriguing, and for a time in the late 1990s, Duane Weber was one of the most hyped suspects in the media. The FBI, however, checked his fingerprints against those in the plane. No match. They also eventually tested his DNA against the partial DNA from Cooper's tie, and Duane Weber was not a match. With no physical evidence tying him to the crime, the FBI officially eliminated Weber as an active suspect in 1998. His fascinating confession could have been the ramblings of an ill man, or perhaps guilt over crimes unrelated to Cooper. We'll likely never know. But Joe Weber remained convinced her husband had been D.B. Cooper, and Duane's story continues to crop up in Cooper discussions as one of the more intriguing personal confessions. Sheridan Peterson. Among the more mysterious names floated, Sheridan Peterson was actually investigated by the FBI in the early 70s and again decades later. Peterson was a former Marine and an expert skydiver who worked for Boeing in the 1960s. Specifically, he helped write safety manuals for the 727 aircraft. That immediately caught the attention of investigators. Who better to know about the rear stairway and how to jump from it than someone intimately familiar with the plane? He was also an adventurer. He had been a smoke jumper, trained to parachute into wildfires. In photos from the late 1960s, Peterson even bore a resemblance to the Cooper composite sketch, except for one detail. The hijacker was described as having brown eyes, and Peterson's eyes are bright blue. Peterson always denied he was Cooper, and he told authorities he was living abroad in Nepal at the time of the hijacking. He was known to have a mischievous side and even once wrote an essay in a skydiving magazine joking about hijacking planes. Despite the coincidences, nothing definitive ever tied him to the crime. Peterson passed away in 2021, still maintaining his innocence. He remains a favored suspect for some, especially those who suspect the hijacker had an aviation or military background, but no smoking gun has ever been found. After all these years, the fate and identity of D.B. Cooper remain unsolved, making it one of the greatest crime mysteries of the 20th century. The Cooper case combines elements of adventure and audacity. A man risked everything on a daring plan and might have gotten away with it. It's no wonder the story has taken on a life of its own. D.B. Cooper has been immortalized in folk songs, books, movies, and countless TV documentaries. In the Pacific Northwest, he's a bit of a folk hero, the mystery man who beat the odds and might still be out there somewhere. Cooper's legend taps into a certain American outlaw romance, despite the fact that he endangered many lives and committed a serious crime. The reality, of course, is that we still don't know whether Cooper survived his leap from the 727. Did he land safely and slip away into the night, spending the ransom money under a new identity? Or did he die in the wilderness, his remains and most of the money still out there in the Cascades, slowly decaying? The FBI's official stance leans towards the latter. They suspect he did not survive, but without a body or definitive proof, the case lives on as an open question, and people love an open-ended tale. Even with the FBI stepping back, the hunt for answers continues in a different way. Citizen sleuth groups and intrigued experts are still digging, reanalyzing old evidence with new technology, searching the forest for parachute scraps, and even retesting the DNA on that black clip-on tie. Every few years, a potential new lead makes headlines. A deathbed confession here, a trace of rare algae on the money there, or a tip about someone's weird uncle. So far, none of these leads has cracked the case, but hope remains that one day a piece of evidence could surface that ends the story for good. Until then, the story of D.B. Cooper remains a fascinating whodunit. It's a slice of American lore where a man literally vanished into thin air, or so it seems, and got away with a sack full of cash. Whether he perished in the woods or lived out a secret second life, Cooper achieved something that had never been done before and hasn't been done since. He pulled off the only unsolved commercial airline hijacking in U.S. history, and in doing so, etched his alias into the history books. The night of November 24th, 1971, gave birth to an American legend. D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, disappeared without a trace, but his story is very much alive. It survives in the files of the FBI, in the memories of those aboard Flight 305, and in the imaginations of all of us who are captivated by the idea of the man who fell from the sky and was never seen again. Will we ever learn the truth? Perhaps one day the final pieces will fall into place. Until then, the case of D.B. Cooper remains an enthralling mystery, one that continues to intrigue, baffle, and inspire over 50 years later.